somewhat coordinated, but it is good to see you all. This is the best part of the conference, Paul, clearly. And we're excited about the panel conversation today. I want to start with just a lightning round, letting you each introduce your organizations, the scale and scope of what you do in your own words, just briefly. And let's just start at the end. Ryan, why don't you lead off?
Sure, yeah. My name's Ryan, and like I was said, is Chief Academic Officer at KaiPod Learning. We operate 12 micro schools or pods across the country, 6 in Arizona, 4 in New Hampshire, 1 in Boston, and then 1 in Roswell, Georgia. And our whole thing is just trying to empower parents to provide the curriculum or the education options that they think is best for their kids. And we provide kids a space to come, give them time and space to complete whatever it is that the parents or the virtual schools are assigning them, and then give them plenty of social time to hang out and have fun together, give them some enrichment. And so it's really designed off of sort of bring your own curriculum, and we'll provide a space for you to complete that work and have fun at the same time.
Yeah, Michael Jensen, CEO of Labster, and we are, as was just mentioned, a virtual science education provider, also now in healthcare and nursing especially. But you can sort of imagine it as a flight simulator for teaching science in a way that's fun, engaging, and exciting for the students as well. So one of the main challenges that we solve in the industry is really providing equal access for every single student anywhere in the world. Imagine them having access to a $100 million laboratory where they can go around and play and experiment with science and truly master and learn science in a really fun and engaging way, which is increasingly what we're seeing, what students, the new generation, are really expecting, not just access to educational material, but something that's really fun and engaging and meets them at the way that they're used to engage with online games and things like that. So a lot of the work we do is, especially with districts as well as community colleges around the world, is primarily here in the US. And we essentially help institutions launch a digital infrastructure for science. So instead of spending hundreds of millions of dollars on science facilities, you can instead build these virtual infrastructures now. So it really provides massive scale in terms of impact at very low costs. And we're really excited about the work we get to do with so many institutions now, having thousands of institutions helping millions of students all over the world. And we're continually looking for more partners to scale our impact. I think besides that, we have 230 people at Labster, a combination of scientists, game designers, as well as pedagogical experts and learning scientists. And we really bring all of these different disciplines together to truly design and invest in building truly scalable educational solutions that then ultimately can have a massive impact because of the beautiful thing about technology. Once you build it, there's almost zero incremental cost, right, of delivering and scaling it out. So any student now in the world with access to a mobile phone or a laptop, they can now have a $100 million laboratory in their pocket, which I always really like. So maybe I'll round off with our mission as a company and why we do all of this. It's really the belief that to solve major global challenges around the world, we need incredibly bright, excited, passionate scientists working on these challenges. And it all starts with the education that we provide at the district school level, as well as colleges around the world. And so we're really proud to be able to work with so many partners to further that mission. So, yeah.
Meredith Olson, and I lead Vela Education Fund. So our goal overall
At the top.
There we go.
There we go. So our, okay, we'll start over. My name is Meredith Olson. I lead Vela Education Fund. Our goal overall is that we want to see transformation of the education system, meaning education should enable every single person to dig deep, develop the necessary talents, skills, and abilities that they've got so that they can ultimately live a life of meaning and purpose. To that end, we support and believe in transformation happening both in system as well as out of system. But specifically, we believe that it's very, very difficult for transformation within systems to happen without the emergence of out of system alternatives that really stretch the canvas, that really push our imagination about what could be possible. And so because of that, Vela was established to specifically invest in permissionless innovation. So what does that mean? The definition that we use for permissionless innovation is support for innovators who are serving the values and priorities of their customers without requiring the blessing of anyone. So that means they're not asking for permission from policymakers, from funders, or from people in power. They are held accountable by the customers they are serving, the families and the kids, in this case, in education. So that's our criteria. We're investing in people who are brave, courageous, permissionless innovators who are serving the needs of families and kids. Okay, so how do we do that? So we do that by, we want to bring visibility to the incredible people who are doing this work, and they are happening in every community. We've heard a number of examples over the last 2 days. In fact, 9 of our Vela community members have joined us here during the last 2 days, which is pretty exciting. But what we do is we identify permissionless innovators, we elevate them, we attract them through trust-based funding. That's what we do. And so we trust that they know the values and priorities of their customers better than any funder would, better than I would, better than any policymaker would, right? And so that's the way we attract them. We then connect them to one another. We build community together. Why do we do that? We do that to enable capacity building, to enable knowledge sharing, because even as people are independent, autonomous entrepreneurs, they are constantly seeking to learn and improve from one another. This is just the nature of being a human. And so we see this happen all the time. So we identify them, we elevate the work they're doing, we connect them to a community. This builds confidence, it builds creativity. We see people learning and growing together, and then we reinvest in the most compelling creators that are part of our community. So our results to date, we've been engaging in this work since 2019. We've awarded 1,806 grants. We're on a rolling cycle, so we have more that are awarded every week. So more than 1,800 grants, totaling just shy of $20 million. Our entrepreneurs have reached more than 6 million students. That's a lot of learners, that's a lot of families. Now we do have a few outliers that are very large. Our average entrepreneur, the average number of learners and families served is about 4,500, but the median is about 55. So a lot of small learning environments, kind of like what we talked about, what we've been talking about these 2 days.
Terrific. So I'm reminded of the joke: a funder, an ed tech company, and a learning pod company get together in a bar, and the topic is advancements in instructional technology specifically. So I want to talk a little bit about how each of you are advancing or benefiting from the advances that you're seeing in instructional technology. And then as we wind our way through the panel, we're going to get to some of the weak spots perhaps in that landscape as well. But let's start with the advancement and benefiting. Michael, I want to start with you, and then we'll kick it to both of you, Ryan and Meredith. I was with the president of Morehouse College about a year ago. I believe they're one of your customers. And he was saying, this is amazing because we have now the capabilities of an MIT laboratory on the laptop for every one of our students. There are about 2,500 students, so they can never otherwise afford that sort of technology. Talk about the advancements that you've made during the pandemic and sort of what the roadmap is.
Yeah, so I think maybe start a bit with describing a little bit more what we actually built. So it's true that we do provide virtual laboratories, which you can imagine as a physical laboratory turned into a virtual world, just like a flight simulator. But we do much more than that. We really work closely with the pedagogical experts, the learning scientists as well, to bring in cutting innovation when it comes to learning science, to really understand how do students learn, how do they learn most effectively, both in the real but also in the virtual worlds, and how can we really carefully design a learning experience that optimizes those learning outcomes. A simple example is you have to learn a very complex concept. Many students struggle with it. They find it very hard to understand, but if you allow to create an environment where they can experiment and fail, learning through failure, trial and error, then you can greatly increase the deep understanding that they get of these concepts. Now you can imagine in a physical laboratory, you don't want to have the students so, hey, just go in, play around, you can experiment and create some explosions and see what happens. But in the virtual worlds, we can actually not only do it, we can actually encourage it so they can really learn through failure. So there is a lot of instructional design opportunities suddenly as we start to use increasingly virtual technologies that wasn't even possible before. And working with the experts, at institutions like Harvard, we also work with closely as well, MIT and all the institutions around the world. We collaborate together with them to ensure that we truly design pedagogical and instructional designs into these virtual experiences so that they optimize the learning outcomes as well as the equal access in everything that we do. Yeah, I think maybe pause there, but someone.
No,
can
that's good.
chime in.
And then I'm curious, Meredith and Ryan, you can both jump in. How the the organizations you're funding are benefiting from the advances in ed tech broadly defined, and parents are bringing in with their students technology and different curricular choices. So how is that fueling what you're doing? You can go first, Ryan, and then Meredith.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, KaiPod doesn't work without, in a lot of different ways. KaiPod at least doesn't work without really high quality educational technology. There are parents who are using all sorts of things. There are definitely parents who are sending their kids with workbooks, but most of our parents are sending their kids with laptops and giving them, assignments on IXL or Khan Academy or things like that. And we're big believers that the educational technology that's being developed at places like Labster and all over the world are just only going to continue to improve and get better. And that most kids are going to get instruction and tasks or assignments assigned to them through technology. And that trend is not going away. So maybe an interesting way to answer or think about this question is just from the lens of what does that mean for the role of a teacher? And we actually don't call them teachers at KaiPod, we call them learning coaches. People say guides, but it's a very different type of role than what a lot of teachers are used to. There's a heavy emphasis on being, if you think about the job of a teacher now, for example, in a traditional school, they have to wear so many hats. They have to be their content expert. They have to know, social emotional learning. They have to really create this dynamic culture within their classroom. They have to be therapists. They have to, go to so many different meetings, IEP meetings, and conversations with parents. It's such an enormous skill set. And I do think that ultimately it makes sense that we start kind of breaking that apart and thinking about, okay, what are the roles that technology can handle? And then what are the essential skills that an educator needs to be able to deliver? And I think, assuming that these programs in education and ed tech continues to get better, what educators are going to need to be able to do is one, know kids deeply and personally and develop really strong relationships with them, motivate students through that way, like inspire them, make it so that they are feeling fantastic about what it is they're doing and that they're at the exact right level, know their skill set, their math, their English skill set inside and out, and so that they can kind of put the next product or the next education, the next thing that makes sense for them in front of them. And they need to be able to create a space that kids really want to come back to and kids really want to be in. We put a premium on, how much fun do kids have today? How connected do they feel to you? How connected do they feel to the learning environment that you're creating? And do they want to be there? Do they have friends there? And being able to create a space like that and and create an environment where that is happening, I think is what the future is going to look like. And I guess the last thing I'll say that I think the ed tech, maybe we'll get into the sort of the challenges with technology right now, but just the feedback process, right? That, I think teachers at this point anyway still have a major role to play in that, in giving kids feedback and helping them think about their process, et cetera. How good does technology get at being able to do that versus how much is a human still needed is a sort of open question that we can get into later.
So one of the challenges if you are operating a traditional school, and it almost doesn't matter if you're public, private, charter, you name it, but if you're operating a traditional school, you solve for what is the sort of efficient scale of your school. In other words, how large do I need to build the school? How many students should be enrolled in the school? And what is that optimal point to have the, sort of your minimum cost, right? So you solve for that. And there's a minimum efficient scale of a traditional school. And let's just say for illustration purposes that's about 800 to 1,000 kids. That's probably about right, right? And if you have a school with about 800 kids, then you can afford to have an auditorium. You can afford to have a physics teacher, a German teacher, a school nurse, right? You can afford to have a performing arts center. You can afford to have a football stadium. You can afford to have a track. So what does technology do? Well, what technology has done is that it's accelerated the speed and distribution of information. So our access to information today and what we can do with it and how we can improve productivity is completely different than when that original efficient scale of schooling was essentially solved, call it, 80, 90, 100 years ago. But yet we've got a built environment of these schools that were designed traditionally for that purpose. So where we see technology having a huge role is that it is radically dropping the minimum efficient scale to offer schooling alternatives. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that for a relatively low price, you can offer access to a quality education. Does it look just like what you would receive in a traditional school? Absolutely not. It looks completely different. And you might not receive all of those services that you would receive in a full service model. However, for a relatively low cost, you can receive an education that parents are willing to pay for as an alternative to a traditional school because you have access to Labster, because you have access to other ways of solving for these other needs, right? Duolingo, I mean, you name it. You can walk through all of the instructional tech packages. KaiPod is solving for this. You don't need to have an expert in every single subject matter in a physical person. You can replace that with a loving and nurturing guide or learning coach, right? And then connect them to subject matter experts. So when you unbundle and recombine education in different ways, you can drop that minimum efficient scale of schooling. Well, this matters because it means that rather than having to send your kid to call it like a base load school, a big box school down the street with 800 or 1,000 kids, you can send your kid to one of a whole diversity of options that are much smaller, maybe located closer to your house, maybe offering something that's unique to you. So it's a completely different mindset and shift, and that's enabled because of technology. So let me give an example on this, and then I'll move on. A lot of times I think we can learn from cross-domain knowledge and examples, and then think, how would we apply that to an education context? So take the health and fitness industry. So on the one hand, you've got a YMCA, which is a full service product offering. It's got your weight room, it's got your yoga studio, it might have a swimming pool, might have childcare on site, might have outdoor, facilities, sports, but it's a full service facility. That's one extreme. Another extreme, you can go run on your own in your neighborhood. All right. Okay. Is there anything in the middle? There's a heck of a lot of diversity in the middle, right? So there's one-on-one training studios that are small footprint. Do they do everything the Y offers? They actually don't. Well, why the heck would you go there instead of going to the Y? Well, maybe there's a reason that you value this as an alternative. Or what about Orange Theory or Soul Cycle, a branded offering that's been franchised all across the country? Or how about a Peloton in your house? I mean, you're cycling, couldn't you ride a bike? But now you're doing it in your basement with other people in a connected way, right? And so here's the thing, we can have and participate. I work out, I go to the Y, I have a Peloton in my basement, and I like to run, and I also go to a one-on-one training studio. I'm not a bad person for doing that. I'm customizing my life, right? So how do we conceive of that? Think about that in education, right? How many of you, raise your hand if you only work out in one mode? Okay, one. How many of your children typically receive their education in one place? Yeah, it's probably a lot more if we're really honest. So anyway, so that's where I think technology is really driving things. This movement is going to continue with or without the support of funders or policymakers, because just economic drivers, realities, and technology it's going to make it go that way.
It's fascinating. You're speaking to the supply side and how it dramatically changes that equation. I want to shift to the demand side, where the last panel was sort of unlocking, right, a lot more demand. And I'm curious what you all see in terms of what educators and parents who are making choices. So, Michael, you're selling more towards schools with educators. You both are interacting or through your portfolio seeing the choices of parents. What are you seeing in terms of what they want in terms of instructional technology? And specifically, how have those dynamics been increasing lately? Or have there been backlashes or perhaps rollbacks as the world sort of exits this pandemic stage?
Yeah, so I mean, I think one thing that we learned in the pandemic is that parents don't necessarily want their kids in the house all day. And I think that's totally normal and fine. I think how realistic is it to sort of say, okay, your 12-year-old is going to stay at home, both parents are going to work, or the single mom's going to go to work, or whatever it is, and they're going to learn everything they need to learn. I mean, I just don't think that's the way that it's going to look. And so, I think we still, and obviously this is what KaiPod is trying to do, we still need to think about, well, how do we create spaces that kids want to be in? How do we create people that they have deep relationships with that are overseeing and sort of guiding them through their educational process? And, so I think that like the idea to a lot of parents of like, well, I'm just going to like create this playlist and the kids are going to work through it all day is not something that people are huge fans of. I think, yeah. And so I'll leave it there and then kind of chime in as you guys talk.
Yeah, I can talk maybe more from the teacher's perspective, and because we work primarily with teachers now. And so what we see often is that educators actually find it very challenging in the classroom to engage the entire classroom, as every single student is typically at a different level. And suddenly having to do that online makes it only even more challenging during the COVID times. Now being back again is still a big challenge to engage every single student individually. So providing them with technologies that in a way augment the educator to allow them to reach every single student on an individual one-on-one level is a really empowering thing that the educators love. We provide them then with a dashboard with an overview of how their students are progressing, what are the areas that their classroom are specifically succeeding at or challenged at, and how can the educator best serve that specific classroom based on the insights that they get from the systems that we provide them with. And so there's a lot of potential for the educators to benefit and improve their teaching through the use of these technologies, and that's where we constantly work and collaborate with them. And another example I want to bring up, maybe a little bit more to the earlier point on instructional design, what you can sort of think about how we right now we have thousands and thousands of educators across the world, and especially also here in the US, who are teaching biology 101, an intro course. They're all doing it in their own individual way, but some of them are doing it better. Some parts are better than others. Why don't we work across all of these different educators and collaborate with them, create an environment in which they can provide feedback and how we can create the perfect bio one-on-one experience with every single individual student that not only gives the students the best experience, but also gives the feedback to the educators that they need to then have the follow-up lectures. And so that's what we do at Labster. We have this open collaboration with our educators, the partners, to continuously improve the simulations that we built. And it really provides the educators with a feeling of being empowered, being able to provide their students with the best possible learning experience. And then I think that the last thing that again, I haven't talked about yet, but we of course provide great instructional design, we provide access to lab infrastructure, but we also just make it fun. And for an educator to see their students being excited about science, engaged in science, is a very rewarding feeling. And that's something that we hear a lot from our educators as a big benefit from these virtual technologies.
So this, the demand side trends, I think, are an interesting question. Where is this coming from? So we've seen increased dynamism as a result of the pandemic. We already saw a fair amount of dynamism before, meaning new entrants, some exits, some churn in the out-of-system space, but really accelerated during the pandemic. I mean, we went from having, call it, anywhere, depending on who you talk to, maybe from 3 to 5% of the school-age population being unconventionally schooled. Prior to the pandemic, that increased to 100% in a period of a week, like the second week of March in 2020. And literally every kid in America was being unconventionally schooled in some way. Of course, we've moved on from that. However, we're still at an elevated level of the school-age population that is unconventionally schooled. So we're estimating probably 7 to 9% right now, but those estimates could be off. But what's happened, in addition to just increased adoption, we've seen increased openness. So even if students aren't participating full-time in a full replacement alternative, there's a greater openness, and there's openness in the supplemental market as well. So that's what we see on the demand side. There's a curiosity that has been piqued that maybe wasn't there before to as great an extent. Okay, so then when we start thinking about technology, we try to think about innovation through 2 lenses, and we see these coming together frequently in small learning environments. And about half of our Vela grant community are operating small learning environments. So call it 900 or so, right? So what we see is, okay, so when you think about innovation, our minds generally lead us to think about like software or technology or Silicon Valley. It's like slick, right? That's what we think of when we hear the word innovation. And that's true. And we see a lot of our small learning environments utilizing whatever technology they can get their hands on in order to augment and improve the learning experience. At the same time, another definition of innovation is innovation as renewal. So if you look this up in the dictionary, you'll see this, making new again, right? So innovation is the act of making something new again. We see this in spades across our grant community, where you couple 2 to 3 hours a day or 2 to 3 days a week of core academics, oftentimes enabled through technology, and the balance of the time is devoted to doing things like being in nature, being a kid, back to basics, running around outside, growing a plant, playing with chickens, riding horses, going on hikes. It's unbelievable what people are doing. I would say one of the biggest trends I've seen is a strong core coupled with a lot of getting back to nature, finding my place in the world. So nature-based learning, forest learning, outdoor Christian play-based learning. I mean, I feel like we've seen every permutation of this, but again, I think technology enables that to happen by ensuring you get quality academic instruction coupled with how can I just love the great outdoors and be a kid again?
Yeah, I think I want to pick up on the debundling and rebundling, and Matthew was talking about this too, and just in terms of the enrichment that parents are signing their kids up for and how much that has increased. And there's a book called The Smartest Kids in the World by Amanda Ripley, and it goes through like different countries, like the top performers on the PISA test. And one of them is South Korea. And part of what motivates me every day is so that we don't look like South Korea 10 years from now. Because what happens in South Korea is that their parents send their kids to school, they come home, they eat dinner, and then parents send their kids off to real school at night, which is like tutoring and all these enrichment packages. So I think we're kind of at this critical point where, I mean, I really don't want my daughter to have to spend 10 hours a day in order to get a proper education. I want to be able to, give her the experience of authentic learning and, during the normal sort of day, so that she can have these, be a kid moments. And if you look, there's you think about things like Russian School of Math, right? Their parents are essentially outsourcing math class to the after-school program, which is just crazy. And I think that, I'm hoping that we can create a way for math to be learned during working hours.
So I want to stay on this for a little bit, just on sort of the underbelly of this, because I think your comments sort of reference this, where people are afraid of too much technology. Before the pandemic, there was definitely a backlash growing against sort of the ed tech, learn through the screen movement. You sort of presented it as there may be a balance there. We may be comfortable for part of our day and want to get off of it for the other part of our day. I'm just curious how you all see this though manifesting itself. Do you feel that there's a backlash returning right now as people have come back? Or no, they're sort of saying like, I get it, technology is an important component, but I want it to be one component. How is that shaking out right now?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I'm trying to reflect on. So we don't really see or feel a backlash, but I also think it's important to say that we don't encourage, the use of virtual technologies the whole day. We're just saying there are certain parts of the educational experience today that is either too expensive, too time-consuming, too boring, just basically ineffective to not teach using virtual technologies. And if you think strategically and thoughtfully about what are those parts of our educational experience today that is just not optimal in the way it's being taught today and where we can benefit from technologies, take those pieces and make that virtual. So in the case of science, there's a lot of, again, the flight simulator is a great analogy. You don't want to have a pilot jump straight into an airplane and just practice 100% of the time in the airplane. You actually do want them to practice first virtually. And there are a lot of these benefits as well that we're only just starting to use now in a lot of, let's say, science or healthcare education. So we certainly encourage our partners, institutions, both higher ed and the K-12 space, that they only take the parts of the science education that is ineffective, teach that virtually, because it is much more engaging. It makes the students feel much more confident and well prepared, and then go into the physical labs or into the nature and so forth. in terms of going into nature, we do have a benefit of virtual technology. We can take them to Mars or to the moon, and we can do those kinds of experiences. So those places I would still encourage. But yeah, no, certainly don't encourage the students to learn entirely in virtual ones.
Yeah, I think so. Definitely, there's no one wants their kids staring at a computer screen for eight hours a day, and I think that there's going to be backlash against that. I think another piece of backlash that I was a math teacher for a while, so a lot of people especially now that I'm interacting with a lot of parents through my kid, they'll sort of say, "Oh, what are your recommendations about math?" and da, da, da. And I'll say something like Khan Academy, and they'll be like, "Oh, we tried that, but like it didn't really work." And I think basically what they get at is sort of like the kid, when they get stuck, they can't quite get unstuck enough to do it. I mean, for some sort of like kids who just, you could stick them in front of a computer and they're just going to like intake information all day and be able to do whatever, there's 5% of the population of kids that are able to do that, and that's great. But I think for the vast majority of kids, I mean, and I don't know, I'm sure you guys interact with Khan Academy to some degree, but it is very good. Like the videos that are there, and Sal does a pretty good job of breaking things down. And then if you get stuck, you can get a hint, and there's like good, the process of how to solve the problem is there. But it's still like the kid goes on for 10 minutes, can't figure something out, gets a problem wrong, and then sort of doesn't know what to do after that. And so there's a need, and this I was mentioning the feedback, there's a need for somebody to come over and be like, "Oh, here, like check this out," or "Have you thought about it this way?" And that's, that I think is the biggest, or one of the larger pushbacks that I think parents for when their kids are engaging in these technology programs is the kid lasts like 10 minutes on it, and then it's, well, I don't know what else to do without some sort of human intervention.
Can I follow up on that? I think that's a really interesting point also. I think it's important when we talk about technology that we distinguish between interactive, engaging technology and just passive, let's say Zoom-based, to watch a lecture on Zoom, because there's a huge difference, of course, in those. And I think if you can find ways to engage the students and make it interactive, make them part of it, make it collaborative with students all over the world working together on solving scientific challenges, for instance, then you can really create an immersive experience that is much better sometimes than sitting physically in a classroom and watching a professor or a teacher teach a single topic. I actually think there are examples where the virtual world actually is much better than the physical.
I think we just see one of the features of the private sector and small learning environments is that parents tend to be deeply engaged in these small learning environments with the providers of, with the actual operators of the facilities. And in many cases, they're one and the same. So they're parent operated or they're cooperative, right? And so you're so close to the students, and there's such a small group of students that you're able to adapt your instructional practice based on whether or not it's working. And how responsive the students are in your learning environment. So if there's too much technology, you dial it back. If there's not enough, then you dial it up, right? And so I just think that, gosh, I mean, again, I think it's a feature, not a bug, of the fact that you have fewer students in one place, that you can really individualize the experience. And it's not about the software individualizing the experience for the student. It's that the students and their environment, their educators are individualizing the practice by leveraging software, which is, that's a tweak. That's a slightly different thing.
Super interesting. You're both taking me to the supply side that I want to go to next in terms of trends. And we'll go maybe for another 5-10 minutes, and then we're going to open it up. So start thinking of the questions that you want to ask these folks. But on the supply side, and Michael, I'm going to ask you to step out of the Labster context on this and talk more generally also. What are the trends that you're really excited that is coming online now that wasn't possible maybe 5 years ago, that families, educators are taking advantage of? What are the gaps also that you're seeing on the other side of it, where you're saying, if a family comes into KaiPod and they're like, I really want to do X, and it's just not there yet, or you're hearing it across your portfolio? Where are those weaknesses or gaps in that supply side of the ed tech market right now? I'm going to have Meredith start because you all look more stumped.
Okay. All right, so we've done a fair amount of research within our grant community to ask them what are their pain points, what are the problems they're having. We have survey data on this. In fact, we've got a research report on our website called Classrooms Anywhere that dives into some of the, sort of the obstacles that entrepreneurs are having in order to get to sustainability. And I'll say that this is where EdTech, and it's even broader than EdTech, can play a huge role. It's around solving the practical problems of being an entrepreneur who is providing an educational environment, right? And so it's things like, I need software or technology or supports to manage HR. How do I manage both paid teachers as well as volunteers? How do I think through that? How do I make that all work? And are there technology tools that can make that easier? How do I think about cash management? How do I collect tuition or fees? How do I manage the barter system, which is in force in many of these small learning environments? How do I manage communications with parents and families to keep them engaged to the level they want to be engaged? How do I think about scheduling in an unconventional way? Because we're not talking about standardized scope and sequence in most of these learning environments. So you have to think about schedules in a completely different way. So we're seeing all kinds of platforms that do back-end sort of administrative operation. We're seeing platforms getting developed, and we're investing in these with our fund. But matching services, how do you match educators to families? We see, oh, wow, one of the trends that's out there, I mean, it's accelerating. There's so many teachers who are at or near retirement who are now feeling liberated to do what they've always wanted to do. How do I match them? Like, how do we match them to families who would like nothing more than to have, a senior experienced educator come in and rock the world for their kids? Right. So we're seeing platforms that enable that matching. So there's so much, I mean, it feels like blue sky in a way. There's so much open space to innovate, to manage some of these practical business problems so that we can serve education differently.
That probably can start to help with some of the ESA, I would imagine, matching challenges and some of that as well over time. Michael, Ryan, trends you're excited about, things that you wish were there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think Meredith, you identify so many problems, Meredith. That's so true. And I'll just an example of this from KaiPod is there are a lot of times where a parent will come in and just, they'll ask us for turn to us for advice and sort of say, like, well, what curriculum do you offer, and this, that, or what do you recommend? And I'll say something, and then I'll say, like, okay, can you get your kids signed up so they can, be on this on Monday? And then another week or so goes by or whatever. And, I came back to the team and was kind of like, can we just buy this stuff for them? Because they're willing to pay for it. They're just not like doing it. And then we could have the process set up on our end so the learning coach can see everything going on. It'd just be easier. And they're kind of like, whoa, the accounting on that is too crazy. Like, that's not happening. Like, we can't do that. So it is things like that that make it challenging and difficult for us to, to better serve families. I'll leave it there and let you talk.
Yeah, I'm still reflecting even myself here, but I'd say some of the we see mostly we see gaps around given teachers and educators the time and the space to learn and adopt new technologies and become comfortable using these technologies has probably been the biggest sort of obstacles that we see in terms of adoption of technologies. And as you mentioned earlier, just how many things we're expecting educators to do today. And then suddenly like, oh yeah, you need to master these 200 different edtech tools that you need to know as well. And it's just a very, you cannot meet those demands. Yeah. So I'd say we see a gap, not just, I mean, there's training being made available, but it's too overwhelming. So starting to work more with the educators and understanding what is actually their role, what is truly expected of them, and how can we start to maybe split the role into different types of areas of expertise, I think is an area that we need a lot of thinking and work to do. Specifically in nursing is an interesting area where we work a lot. We create virtual reality-based nursing simulations, but we see challenges where the state boards of nursing are not yet fully recognizing and not even encouraging the use of simulation, even though it's very clear that even based on research, the benefits that are there. And so being more open to the and seeing all the benefits there and accelerating some of the legislative or policy work that needs to be done to encourage more use of virtual simulations is a gap that we also see in different areas. Yeah, maybe.
I can talk a little bit too. I think this debundling idea is fantastic. I'm fully on board. But just going back to the fitness example, there's nothing quite like the Fitbit or the watch where you can just sort of look at and get some of your data or all your data, right? Whether you're going to Orange Theory or whether you're going to you're on your Peloton, you at least get there's a one sort of centralized spot, even though your exercising is very debundled. There's one spot where you can go to and sort of look and say, okay, what are my metrics right now? And there isn't anything that I've seen yet where, and we have kids who really have a debundled education. They're using one curriculum for math, a different like workbook for English, and then they're in an out school class for science. And so it's like, well, I don't know exactly where to go so I can get the information about how the kid is doing in all those different areas. And our learning coaches are sort of logging in and out of 1,000 different platforms, trying to like figure all that stuff out. And I think having something where it's kind of like progress monitoring and making sure the kid is going in and doing what they need to be doing, et cetera, et cetera. I think that something to sort of like centralize the debundled data would be critical.
I would love to respond to this, Ryan, because this is such an interesting conversation, and one I don't know who's gonna solve this problem, but what is the Strava for education, right? Because I think that's what you're talking about. How do I get, or the Apple Health for education,
right?
How do I get it on my watch and on my app where it's not some system that owns my data. No, I own my data, and I'm opting it in, and I'm able to view it, and I'm pulling it from many different sources, right? In order to create my portfolio as a student of what I'm learning in my education, right? And we've had applicants who have applied who have different angles on that, but I haven't seen like that Apple Health or Strava for education. It would be brilliant if someone were to invent that.
And by the way, if you are going to invent that, privacy needs to be a premium. Parents are skeptical of all these things, as they should be. Your child's data and information is so sacred, and there are a lot of different laws around it. So having something where you can access, you and only you are accessing it is essential.
The only thing I'll add as I go into my last question before we open it up is that it strikes me that a lot of ed reformers in the traditional system have tried to think about what are the data systems that would be backpacked to the individual, so the individual would own it. And from my perspective, you're never going to get there when you're going through the institutional, it's just not going to happen. It has to come up from this bottoms up perspective. And so there's been a lot of money spent and wasted trying to solve that problem, much more likely to come up through this system. So last question, because we're at Harvard, and people think a lot about efficacy and research here. And so I'm curious, how do you all think about the efficacy of the education technology that you see being used or that you develop? What's the research that you're doing on it or drawing on, and what are we learning from it?
Well, I mean, every time you go to a educational technologies website, you'll see that they're the best and that they have the best data and they've done all the research, and that's the one that you should use. So I just go to the website. I think
the awkward pause follows. Keep going.
Yeah, so that means I don't have a great answer to this question. No, I mean, I think there's a couple different things. I mean, I think there's sort of like what you think of as traditional data. I don't know if this is exactly what you're getting at, but I think it likely is at least a piece of it, where it's sort of like, is my kid making progress in math, reading, writing, etc.? Do they know the stuff that a normal fifth grader should be able to do and know? And by the way, there's been a lot of pushback against that. I have found that actually people are not that, they don't think that that's that crazy of an idea. Even homeschoolers are kind of like, yeah, I want to know, my kid doing well. And so I think that continue, looking at that type of data, and we want to tinker around with sort of like, okay, we put, a couple different kids on this tech platform and this tech platform and this tech platform, like what, which one is going to be the most effective. I think there's other data though that we're not thinking as much about that maybe we should be. And it's not necessarily like standards aligned, but it's just sort of more around like, did this thing inspire a kid to then go out and do further research? Like, how much are you, besides like, okay, yeah, are they learning those key skills? How inspired are they by the experience that they had in the lab? Did they run out and like, try to, blow something up outside? And, I think that type of thing is what I would like to see. I don't know how to go about creating it, but I think that's something interesting to think about.
So I can say on our website, it says that we are the best. We have all of the research to back it up. No, I would add that, I think we're in a lucky case that my co-founder, he's actually a PhD here from Harvard Medical School, and I myself have half a PhD in learning science. But nonetheless, we're very founded in research, and since day one, did everything with a research perspective, and have more than 16 peer-reviewed published studies as well to document the impact that these technologies have, and also independent studies done with our institutional partners around the world. The shift that we're seeing now increasingly is the demand for third-party institutions that are kind of validating that research or conducting additional research. More longitudinal research that you're highlighting there as well is really important. So we also work a lot on that. But I will say we certainly invest a lot in that. It is one of the most important things we hear from, especially the higher ed space, when we work with professors. They want to see the data. Is this really working? Is it truly the impact that you claim it is? And I'm proud to say that at least for our case, we can demonstrate that as well.
So we've done a fair amount of research from within our grant community. Vela's in its third fund right now. After we closed our first fund, we went out to the grant community and we asked, why, like, what's your true why, and why are families choosing to educate in your unconventional learning environment? And we learned three things. So we learned top reasons why. Because keep in mind, these environments are different, not necessarily better. So why are they doing it? Number one, they want parents want their children to be valued and included. They want their child to be respected and known. And for whatever reason, they weren't getting that in their traditional environment. So that was top. Second, they want their child to have a pathway to purpose in their life. Why am I here? What am I going to do with myself in this world? And then third, they want their child to receive a just right education for them, right? And they don't want to feel like a number. And so those were and we coded all the answers, and those were the three highest sort of broad classifications. That was in our first fund, like, why are you doing it? In our second fund, we asked entrepreneurs, how do you define success? How do you measure success? And we acknowledge that they all measure success differently, right? And so this was really interesting because they measure academic success through a variety of means. And so some of it could be through standardized assessment, but more commonly it was through evaluation of portfolios, evaluation of quality of work, writing samples, project work, interviews with parents, interviews with the kid, productions, so it was a much more sort of full view of the child's development as compared to just sort of a standardized assessment. But then when we asked them how they define success of what they're doing as entrepreneurs, they overwhelmingly responded in language that suggested demand. And so that's how they hold themselves accountable. Do I have families that are coming back year after year? Do I have a wait list? Do I have growth and demand? Do more and more people want to come here? And so this is where it gets a little tricky, because I think there's a temptation to want to apply a common benchmark of efficacy across a wide range of diverse ideas. But we got to be a little careful about that. I would say, if I look at an operation, and this is what we see in small learning environments, they are doubling, tripling, and quadrupling in growth. They commonly have wait lists that are greater than the current number of students served. I'm sure you see this at KaiPod. And so I would argue that if a parent is making a decision to leave a traditional environment, to go out of pocket, to contribute time and treasure, many of them contribute their own labor to these environments, it's not because it's worse. okay? It's generally because it's better and it's a lot better. And that's why they're willing to pay for it. And that's why we see these gigantic wait lists for these small learning environments.
Terrific. Let's, questions? Yep.
Okay, so
Up,
thank you,
microphone.
Jamie from West Virginia. So traditionally, when I hear conversations about virtual learning, there's this aspect of it's removing barriers, right? It's like opening up learners to this opportunity to be connected. But in West Virginia, where like 40% of our communities actually have broadband connectivity, I'm just wondering, like, do you have partners? Like, where is the push to make sure that we are really able to reach some of these families where just connectivity is still the barrier and they're unable to unbundle because they don't have that opportunity?
Who wants
Yeah,
to
I
take it?
mean,
Yeah.
that is a crazy statistic. I didn't know that. Yeah, I mean, that is a massive challenge. I think that if you're not connected to Wi-Fi, it's definitely make things significantly more challenging. I do think that there are a ton of community members who, if given opportunity, and Meredith can probably talk a lot more about this than I can, want to make a space better. And there are still a lot of it doesn't all have to be online. There's a lot of high quality textbooks. There's still really good, there's still, the curriculum is paper-based is also getting better in the same way that tech is getting better. I think the challenge is then you're still going to need somebody who's presenting content and doing things in a way that sort of looks more like a traditional school. And I don't know how to solve that problem without the internet.
Yeah, I could say so. So we think a lot about this challenge, and we work also across the world. So there's many other countries where the statistics are even worse, and we have to meet the students where they're at and what the devices they have access to and bandwidth. So we've invested heavily into building the entire virtual technology on a very low-end mobile device with a 3G mobile connection. So now I'm really proud to say I bought a $50 mobile phone, the cheapest I could find in the local telco store, and our system can run on that device even with a 3G. You do have to wait a few minutes for it to load, but it does load, and it does provide the full experience for those students as well. So something for me personally as well that's very dear to my heart. But I recognize it's not all technologies that can do that, and it is really expensive from an edtech provider to build technology that is both highly immersive, interactive, engaging, and has all of these functionalities and can run on really low-end devices, very low in bandwidth. It's a very challenging technical obstacle, but yeah, we've managed to overcome it. So we actually just launched that half a year ago. So it's quite news that we launched that.
Obviously, there's huge obstacles in so many different ways. I would just say, don't ever underestimate the scrappiness, resourcefulness, and determination of Americans. It's unbelievable what people figure out how to accomplish. I'm inspired, and I'm sure many of you in the room have read, it was a long time ago, James Tooley published a book called The Beautiful Tree. And it was a beautiful book. And it was all about his travels across Africa and Asia in search of, he termed them small private schools. And these are really small learning environments. And everywhere he went, he would first start out at a central office in a major metro area and then ask if there were any private schools, if there were any independent operators. And he was essentially told everywhere he went, no, they don't exist. And then he would talk to taxi drivers, or he would talk to people in a local community, at a market, you name it. And then he would find these small learning environments. And it happened everywhere he went. Deeply researched book. And I think when I read that book, I read it, I don't know, 5-7 years ago or something now, I thought, well, that doesn't happen here in the United States. And I think what at least I've learned is that it is happening. It is literally everywhere. Exactly what James Tooley saw and discovered. It was this resourcefulness and scrappiness, people having a will and finding a way. And the pandemic really just shined a light on it.
Paul, last question.
Okay, let me see if I can turn on this technological device here. I'm wondering if this isn't the biggest barrier we have, turning the machine on. So, I was in Egypt, and discovered that the scribes there were the best paid people back in the days of the pharaohs, because they could do something nobody else could do. They could write. And then just last week, I learned from the people I work with in the classroom at Harvard that students today are really good at coding data and manipulating data, but they cannot write. So I'm curious, how are you going to teach kids how to write?
Who wants to take it? That's a good question.
Yeah, this is a thing. It's a challenge. I mean, I can talk. I mean, like I can talk about sort of like pedagogy around writing and things like that. I think what kids need in order to write is, one, to be inspired, and two, to get really good feedback on writing. And I think this is another area. I don't know if this exists, but somebody should invent this too. But it may also be out there. But it's sort of like, is there a way in thinking about this debundling where kids can, where you can find a writing prompt, you can respond to the writing prompt, and then someone on the other end, in addition to maybe a program like Grammarly, where it's sort of like giving you feedback through technology on your grammar, but somebody on the other end can just sort of like, give you some high quality feedback, grade your paper. I know English teachers, and I'm not going to say who they are, but they would pay like somebody to grade some of their kids' papers. And I don't think that necessarily, I don't think that that's the way to go. But I think that, like, if there is a way where that a kid can kind of like get prompts, respond, maybe engage with some other kids who are responding to similar prompts, potentially think about like, okay, are there ways that we can have a writing competition? Or are there ways where we could sort of like, I think that there's a platform, debundled platform out there exists that maybe does this, or maybe should be invented.
So if you'll entertain this, I would love to cold call Curtis on this one. Only because, only because so Vela supported the launch of 4 micro schools with Great Hearts, deploying their Great Hearts online materials, and they've got such a strong classical curriculum that does focus on writing. I would love your thoughts.
Sure, I'm happy to. So 2 answers in my opinion. One is the seminar cycle concludes in writing. You read closely, speak intelligently, and write clearly. When you are reading a text and you go through that cycle, this is a cycle in classical education for thousands and thousands of years, it concludes in writing. And there's so much research out there, David Conley, like there's so much research out there that writing clearly forces you to read better and think more clearly. So one is the seminar cycle is a writing cycle. It concludes in writing. Secondly, when I was at Achievement First, I developed a process-based assessment strategy, which wove together composition class with English and history. And so we went through a process-based assessment cycle. Every 3 weeks in writing class, students would respond to a prompt and go through multiple drafts with a composition teacher that ended in a paper, and built that from 9th grade through 12th grade, and then K-12, and it's now in hundreds of schools across the country. There's no name, it just kind of has grown. So I think writing's really important, process-based assessment, seminar cycles. These things are not new technologies, right? These are old technologies, but they work. Technology can accelerate and support all of those things, yes.
And if I can follow up, I don't know, we did not talk about this before, but we are working on exactly what Ryan just described as the solution. So one of the most time-consuming parts for a teacher in science specifically is grading lab reports and spending time going through that. It's tedious and time-consuming. And actually now text-based AI algorithms are now able to both analyze the text the students are writing, but I think more importantly, you can now provide students with instant feedback. As they're writing a sentence or a paragraph, immediately after the algorithm can say like, oh, you're making this comment textual mistake, or you make sure you reflect on the sentence in this way. And on the right side of the text, a video with your teacher can pop up where the teacher can provide the common feedback that they would provide in that specific type of scenario. So this is still work in progress, but it's coming. So these types of technologies.
And I'll say, just as we wrap up, because I know we're a time moderator prerogative for 30 seconds, I think what Meredith talked about at the beginning of lowering the minimum efficient scale, this is where technology is useful. It's not that there's going to be the algorithm that solves this, but it's more the connecting of experts and distributing expertise that allows us to do this better over time, regardless of geography.
It's not going to turn into Tolstoy.
Tolstoy, well, that's
Maybe not.
Thank you to the panel. If we could be back in 10 minutes, that'd be great.